I am Caroline Mercer, 66 years old and 3 months into life as a widow in Charleston, South Carolina. The city still smells of salt water and magnolias, but to me the air feels heavier than it once did. My husband Henry had been gone since early spring, and I still found myself waking in the night to reach for him, only to feel the cool, empty space beside me. That morning, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, pressing the silk scarf he had given me for our 40th anniversary against my neck. It was pale blue with tiny embroidered lilies, and wearing it made me feel close to him again. My reflection looked older, thinner, and my eyes seemed to carry lines that grief had etched there overnight. I whispered that I would be all right, even as doubt shadowed the words. The call from the law office had come the day before, firm and professional, asking me to appear for the estate meeting at 2:00. It was supposed to be routine. Henry had often told me everything was simple and already arranged, but my stomach had been knotted ever since. I dressed in a navy dress that he always liked on me and fastened a string of pearls he once clasped around my neck with steady hands. Driving downtown, the traffic felt heavier than usual, as if the world had decided to put up obstacles just for me. I tapped the steering wheel to calm my nerves. The closer I came to the office tower, the more I sensed that this was not going to be a simple afternoon of signatures and papers. The parking garage swallowed my car in gray concrete silence, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel before finally shutting off the engine. I gathered my purse, my documents, and stepped into the echoing space. My heels clicked sharply and bounced back at me from the walls, and each sound reminded me I was alone. Henry had warned me often about dark garages, about keeping my guard up, and his voice returned now like a memory. That was when I noticed movement near one of the pillars. A man stepped out close, rumpled hair, tangled eyes marked by nights without rest. He kept a respectful distance but raised his hand quickly. His voice cracked with urgency as he called me ma'am and begged me not to start the car earlier, not to sign anything inside today. I froze in place, clutching the handle of my purse, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo too. He said his name was Knox Rowe, and that he once worked upstairs until he was let go. His words tumbled out, warning that Sarah, my daughter-in-law, had been working with people inside the firm. He claimed she had prepared papers to show I was no longer fit to handle my own life, that she had stories and even reports ready to prove it. I wanted to dismiss him as a stranger rambling, but something in his eyes stopped me. They were not wild or threatening. They carried worry, even desperation, but also something steady, as if he had risked everything to tell me this. I felt the cold of the garage creep up through the soles of my shoes, and dread coiled in my stomach. My mind raced between disbelief and fear, between the memory of Sarah's polite smile at dinners and the possibility of betrayal I had never allowed myself to imagine. I turned toward the elevator, each step heavy, while Knox remained in the shadows behind me. His warning echoed louder than my footsteps. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, and the fluorescent light above flickered as if it too was unsure what truth I was about to face. I pressed the button, my hand trembling, knowing this meeting was no longer routine. It was the beginning of something that could change everything. The law office tower rose above the street, all glass and steel shining in the pale afternoon light. I walked through the revolving doors, the cool air inside striking against my skin. The marble floor echoed my footsteps, and each sound reminded me of how alone I was in this building, filled with silence and calculation. The receptionist greeted me with a rehearsed smile and led me to a long hallway lined with frame certificates. My breath tightened as I reached the heavy glass door at the end. Behind it, I saw 4 figures already seated around a wide, polished table. 3 lawyers in tailored suits stared down at their folders. At the far end sat Sarah, her hair perfectly arranged, her posture calm. She lifted her eyes to me with a soft smile that should have felt reassuring, but only deepened the pit in my stomach. She spoke in a gentle tone, saying she had not been sure I would come today. I took my seat at the table, the leather chair too large, the air conditioning too cold. One of the lawyers slid a folder toward me, saying there had been recent concerns about my ability to manage finances. My hand shook as I opened it and saw pages of medical reports with my name at the top, words describing memory loss and confusion that were not mine. Another lawyer explained that Henry had amended his will in the final weeks of his life. According to them, he had feared for my well-being and had created a trust to be overseen by Colton for my protection. My throat closed as I listened, every word striking me like a blow. Henry had never doubted me, not in 4 decades of marriage. Sarah folded her hands on the table, her voice soft and measured. She said they were only trying to make sure I would be cared for, that I should not feel burdened by responsibilities. Her eyes held the same sweetness she had shown me at family dinners, but behind it I felt a calculation I had never wanted to admit. It was the sweetness of someone speaking over me, not with me. My gaze moved around the room, and in the corner near a cabinet, I saw a small red light blinking. It was a recording device capturing every breath, every hesitation. I felt the walls press and the table stretch wider, and my own voice grow smaller. This was not a meeting. It was a stage set for my erasure. The lawyers waited, pens ready, as if my signature were inevitable. I sat still, pressing my palm against the table to steady myself. My husband's memory, the scarf at my neck, the years of managing our home and finances, all rose up inside me in defiance. But the weight of betrayal pressed just as hard, whispering that the people across from me had already decided who I was. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat and forced myself to breathe. Their words echoed in the silence, layering over one another, until they sounded like a judgment already handed down. For the first time, I wondered if Sarah had been preparing this moment for years. I felt the cold edge of fear, but also the first spark of resolve that I would not let them take everything Henry had trusted me with. The heavy silence of the boardroom was broken by a knock at the door. The receptionist stepped in, saying a man downstairs insisted on seeing me. Before the lawyers could dismiss her, Knox Rowe appeared in the doorway, his shoulders squared, though his jacket was frayed at the edges. The room shifted as if a stranger had brought in a storm. Morrison, the lead attorney, barked that Knox was trespassing and should be removed. Knox stood calm, his voice steady, as he said he had worked for the firm for 12 years, until they forced him out for knowing too much. He opened a worn folder and laid out copies of Henry's original will, signed and dated months before his passing, untouched by any amendments. I saw Henry's signature in familiar loops, the same hand I'd watched sign birthday cards and grocery lists for decades. The sight of it brought tears I did not expect. Knox then placed another set of papers on the table, receipts, showing large transfers to the very lawyers who now sat pretending to protect me. He said Sarah had arranged those payments so the will could be altered. Sarah's face drained of color, her hand trembling as she tried to speak. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably, no longer confident, their eyes darting between the documents and the blinking red light in the corner. Knox's words cut through the tension, pointing to the evidence that proved this had been a scheme from the beginning. The certainty in his voice made the ground steady beneath me again. I turned to Sarah, her once smooth voice now broken with denial. She said she only wanted to ensure I would be comfortable, that everything was for my own good. I leaned forward, the pearls at my neck cold against my skin, and told her that trust is not an allowance. You were not protecting me. You were erasing me. The words hung in the air like a hammer blow. Sarah's breath caught her eyes wide, and she collapsed back into her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The lawyers no longer looked at her as an ally, but as someone who had pulled them all into ruin. The room that once felt like a trap now felt like a stage crumbling under its own weight. Knox pushed the evidence closer, saying copies had already been made and sent elsewhere. Panic spread across the faces of men who had entered confident and left cornered. The light of the recorder blinked on capturing every second of their silence. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt power return to my hands. I pressed my palm against the table and let the truth settle. The estate was still mine. Henry's trust in me unbroken. The woman who had smiled across my dinner table was now revealed as someone who had plotted to take my life apart, piece by piece. The control was gone from her hands, and in its place was only the collapse of lies exposed. The house by the river had always been a place of peace for me. The sound of water brushing against the banks carried through the windows, but that evening it felt more like a reminder of how fragile life could be. I had invited Colton and Sarah to sit with me in the living room, not because I wanted to, but because unfinished truths had been gnawing at the walls of my heart. Colton sat slouched on the couch, his shoulders weighed down as if years had been added in only days. Sarah sat next to him, her hands twisting together, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. The silence pressed down until Sarah finally broke it, her voice trembling as she confessed that their debts had climbed so high they could not see a way out. She said she had convinced Colton that I was losing my memory, that I could not be trusted with money. She admitted she twisted ordinary moments into something darker so that he would believe her. She said desperation had made her cruel, that fear of losing everything had turned her into someone she did not recognize. I listened, my chest heavy, feeling as though I had been cut open twice. First by the knowledge that Sarah had lied to me, and then by the deeper wound that my own son had accepted those lies. I remembered the days when Sarah first joined our family, how she helped in the kitchen and laughed easily at the table. Somewhere between those days and this one, she had chosen a different path. Colton raised his head, his eyes red, and said he had believed her because he thought she was trying to protect me. His voice broke as he admitted he had noticed little things like when I misplaced my keys or forgot what time a dinner was. He said he wanted to believe the best in his wife, and the result was doubting the woman who had raised him. I told him that love without trust is only desperation in disguise. The words fell out before I could stop them, but they felt true in my bones. Sarah lowered her head, tears dripping onto her hands, and Colton covered his face with shame. The picture of them together was not of a strong marriage, but of two people sinking in the weight of their choices. I felt grief pull at me, but it was not only for what I had lost. It was for what they had lost in themselves. Sarah had once cared for Henry, had once looked at Colton with joy, but debts and pride had hollowed her out. Colton had once been steady and kind, but his silence had left me unprotected when I needed him most. I straightened in my chair and told them that boundaries were no longer optional. I said I would not allow my life to be rewritten by lies. I said I would not let their debts erase my worth or Henry's trust in me. The river outside whispered against the shore, steady and calm, as if to remind me that truth endures even when storms rise. Sarah whispered that she never wanted to destroy me, only to save her family. Colton whispered that he was sorry that he had failed me as a son. Their words floated in the air, heavy but powerless. I had already chosen the only thing that mattered. I would no longer be at the mercy of their desperation. I would be at the mercy of my own strength. The courtroom decisions came swift and sharp. The lawyers who had once looked at me with cold confidence were sentenced to prison for fraud and forgery. Their polished suits could not protect them when the truth was laid bare, and watching them led away felt like the closing of a poisoned chapter. Sarah was given 3 years probation and ordered to serve 500 hours in community service. The weight of her choices followed her into a life of humility she had never expected. She walked away without prison bars, but with a debt to herself that no amount of work could ever fully erase. Colton moved into a small apartment downtown, the kind of place without a view where every corner reminded him of how far he had fallen. He sold the car he once flaunted and took on long days to rebuild his business from nothing. For the first time, I saw my son not through the shadow of his wife's influence, but as a man trying to find the core of himself again. I found room for Knox in my life, giving him the role of groundskeeper on the property. He moved into the small apartment above the shed and took care of the gardens Henry had once loved. Watching him regain stability reminded me that redemption belongs to those who hold on to their conscience, even when they have nothing else. Inside my home, a wall hook by the front door held only one key. It was my key, mine alone, and it reminded me every day that control of my life rested in my hands. The sight of it was simple but powerful, a quiet symbol that I was no longer erased, but fully present in my own story. The air carried the scent of autumn as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea warming my hands. The maple trees along the river burned with red and gold, their reflection dancing on the slow water. For the first time in months, the silence around me felt calm rather than heavy. Colton arrived in the afternoon, his face thinner, but his eyes clearer than I had seen in years. He spoke quietly, admitting the harm he had done by doubting me, saying he wanted to rebuild what had been broken. I told him forgiveness was not the same as access, that trust must be earned step by step, and he nodded with tears he tried to hide. Later, I walked past the church food bank and saw Sarah among the volunteers. Her hair pulled back, her hands busy serving meals. She did not see me, but I noticed the weight in her shoulders and the effort in her work. Perhaps she was changing, learning what desperation looked like without disguise. That evening, as the sky turned violet and the last leaves drifted down, I whispered to myself that I was not erased. I chose who I am. The words were quiet, but strong, filling the porch with a peace I had fought hard to claim.